The conference room on the 47th floor of Titanium Ventures erupted into chaos at 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon in late September. Ivy Castellano, 7 years old and dressed in a navy pinafore that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month, hurled an iPad across the polished mahogany table.
I had no
The
choice. It was
device
the only way.
cartweeled through the air,
There's always a
scattering
choice.
quarterly reports
And
and
this was the wrong
psychological
one.
assessments like shrapnel before slamming into the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked Midtown Manhattan. The glass held. The child psychologist, Dr. Ellen Morris, credentials from Johns Hopkins and 15 years specializing in pediatric trauma, did not. The woman backed toward the door, clutching her leather briefcase against her chest like a shield. Ivy's small face twisted with fury that seemed too large for her frame, too ancient for her age. The words tore out of her throat, raw and accusing. "You don't understand anything!" Dr. Morris fumbled for the door handle. Her expensive silk blouse had a coffee stain on the collar from when Ivy had knocked the cup over 20 minutes into their session. The 9th specialist in 18 months. The fastest to flee. Victoria Castellano, Elena to those few who knew her before the empire, stood motionless by the window, her Armani suit a study in architectural precision, every seam sharp enough to draw blood. Only her eyes betrayed her, exhausted, desperate, failing. The September sun caught the skyline beyond the glass, painting steel towers in amber light that did nothing to warm the space between mother and daughter. When Dr. Morris escaped into the hallway, Elena whispered to the empty air, "Can no one handle this child?" The question hung unanswered in a room designed for billion-dollar decisions, now littered with the wreckage of one 7-year-old's grief. 18 months. 9 specialists. 0 progress. Elena's reflection in the window showed a woman who could navigate hostile takeovers and board revolts with surgical precision, yet stood paralyzed before her own daughter's pain. 43 floors below, in the janitor's break room tucked between the loading docks and the building's mechanical heart, Marcus Hayes cradled his daughter against his chest. Grace, 7 years old with honey-brown hair that caught light the way her mother's once had, pressed her ear against his sternum as he hummed a lullaby his late wife used to sing. The melody drifted through the ventilation system, soft and warm as candlelight against the building's steel bones. His voice carried up through ductwork and concrete, riding currents of recycled air through spaces the architects never intended for human warmth. Upstairs, in that devastated conference room, Ivy Castellano's head lifted. Her tears stopped mid-track down her cheeks. For the first time in 548 days since her father's plane went down over the Atlantic, something reached through the wall she'd built around her heart. Marcus Hayes's mornings began in a cramped apartment in Astoria, Queens, where the radiator clanged like a prisoner beating bars, and the neighbors argued through walls so thin he knew their grievances better than his own. The alarm pulled him from dreams at 5:30, dreams where Rachel still sang and Grace still had a mother, and his hands created music instead of pushing mops across marble that cost more per square foot than he made in a month. He brewed coffee in a pot older than his daughter, the cheap grounds bitter on his tongue, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the city wake. The skyline rose across the river, distant and glittering, a world apart from this 4th-floor walk-up where the stairs groaned and the electricity hummed a constant note of barely adequate. His hands, scarred from years of equipment handling and calloused from mop handles and cleaning solutions, moved with surprising gentleness as he braided Grace's hair. She chatted about her drawings, her friends, her latest obsession with monarch butterflies, and their 3,000-mile migration. He listened like she was reciting poetry, because 7-year-olds who'd never known their mothers deserve fathers who heard every word. The photograph on the refrigerator caught morning light. Marcus at 27, younger and unbroken, standing behind a mixing board in a studio where Grammy-nominated albums were born. Gold records framed the background. Artists whose names still topped charts leaned over his shoulder, trusting his ear to shape their sound into something platinum. That man was gone. The life he'd built, sound engineer, artist, collaborator, the pulse of creation in his fingertips, had died the same day Rachel hemorrhaged on a delivery table, choosing their daughter over her own breath. Marcus had held his wife's hand as the machines beeped their final symphony. When Grace was placed in his arms, still covered in vernix and possibility, still gasping her first breaths while Rachel took her last, he knew his old life was over. Now he pushed a mop cart through the marble halls of Titanium Ventures, invisible to the executives who rushed past in $1,000 shoes. He didn't mind invisibility. It had advantages. He could observe without being observed, could listen to the rhythm of this strange world where money moved like water and people treated each other like chess pieces to be sacrificed for advantage. They rode the N train together, Grace's small hand in his, her backpack decorated with butterfly stickers bumping against his hip. He dropped her at PS 112 Queens, 3 blocks from the building where he worked, and watched her disappear through doors painted institutional green. Then he walked to Titanium Ventures and descended to the basement where the facility staff gathered, where men and women in matching uniforms maintained the infrastructure that kept the empire running. The other janitors nodded as he clocked in. Frank Williams, who'd worked the building for 20 years. Margaret Thompson, who sent money home to her mother in Georgia and kept photographs of grandchildren she saw once a year taped inside her locker. They existed in the spaces between, cleaning boardrooms after midnight, emptying trash bins full of discarded ambitions and half-eaten lunches that cost more than their hourly wage. Marcus didn't judge. Judgment required energy he saved for Grace, but sometimes, late in the evening when most staff had gone home and he mopped the executive floors alone, he heard piano music drifting down from somewhere above. Hesitant notes, repeated scales, the sound of someone learning. He'd pause, mop in hand, and close his eyes. Music had been his language once. Now it was just an echo of who he used to be. Elena Castellano's mornings began in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, where silence was purchased by the square foot and maintained by staff who knew better than to speak unless spoken to. She woke at 5 without an alarm, her body conditioned by years of discipline to function on minimal sleep. 4 miles on a treadmill that cost more than most cars, her reflection multiplied in floor-to-ceiling mirrors that showed a woman who'd weaponized her own biology. Excellent bone structure from her mother's side, disciplined eating, strategic investments in skincare and dermatology. 33 years old, but could pass for 26. Beautiful, successful, absolutely alone. The rainfall shower in her bathroom never quite washed away the exhaustion that lived beneath her skin. By 7, she sat in her office reviewing reports that judged the fates of thousands of employees she'd never meet. She signed contracts that moved millions, fired executives who failed to meet targets, approved mergers that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Her assistant brought meals she barely touched. Her phone buzzed with messages she answered in clipped sentences that brooked no argument. She was brilliant, ruthless, capable of building revenue by 31% in 2 years while competitors floundered, and utterly incapable of reaching the daughter who lived 3 floors above her office in a private suite designed by child psychologists who'd never met a problem they couldn't solve until they met Ivy Castellano. Ivy had been Emily once, bright-eyed, curious about everything, the kind of child who asked why clouds floated and whether birds dreamed. That child had vanished the morning Elena's phone rang with news that Daniel's private jet had experienced catastrophic mechanical failure over the Atlantic. No survivors. No remains recovered. Just wreckage scattered across cold water and a 5.5-year-old girl who'd watched her mother answer that call, watched her mother's face go white as winter, watched her father leave for London and never return. Ivy had stopped speaking after the crash, stopped smiling, stopped trusting that the world was anything but a place where people you loved vanished into smoke and salt water. Elena had hired the best trauma specialists money could reach, therapists trained in Switzerland, nannies with credentials that read like doctoral dissertations, child psychologists from Johns Hopkins, Yale, the Tavistock Clinic in London. Ivy had outlasted them all. She threw tantrums that left rooms destroyed, locked herself in closets for hours, stared at adults with eyes that saw through their practiced compassion to the fear underneath. The fear that this child was broken beyond fixing. The latest specialist had lasted exactly 47 minutes before fleeing. The two worlds existed in the same building, but might as well have been on different planets. Marcus mopped the lower floors where paralegals worked late and interns fetched coffee for partners who'd forgotten their names. He emptied trash bins full of discarded dreams, rejected proposals, printed emails announcing layoffs, half-eaten lunches from restaurants he couldn't afford. The waste spoke volumes about the people who generated it, their casual relationship with excess. Elena, meanwhile, watched her employees through security monitors, a habit born from corporate paranoia and personal loneliness. The cameras covered every floor, every corridor, blind spots eliminated by consultants who charge 6 figures for security audits. One evening, while reviewing footage, ostensibly checking protocols, actually avoiding the empty penthouse where Ivy refused to eat dinner, she saw him. The janitor with the kind face, kneeling beside his daughter in the lobby, helping her tie her shoe. The little girl laughed at something he said, threw her arms around his neck with unself-conscious joy. Elena felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the ice she'd built around herself since Daniel died. It had been so long since Ivy had laughed like that, so long since Elena had felt anything but the dull ache of inadequacy. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but she watched him walk away hand in hand with his daughter, and felt the weight of everything she'd lost pressing against her ribs like a physical thing. The afternoon it happened, Ivy had been particularly difficult. She'd refused her session with the French tutor, thrown her lunch, organic quinoa and grilled salmon prepared by a private chef, against the wall of her suite, leaving an oily stain on wallpaper that cost $200 per roll. Screamed at the nanny until the woman quit on the spot. The 6th in 18 months to surrender. Elena had been in a meeting about the Seattle expansion, negotiating terms that would reshape their West Coast presence. The call was delicate. Millions rode on her ability to read subtext in carefully worded proposals, to navigate corporate politics while projecting strength. She was winning. Then security's voice crackled through her earpiece. Private channel, urgent tone. "Ms. Castellano, we have a situation. Your daughter is missing from her suite." Elena's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. She muted the call, ignoring the confused expressions of the executives on screen. "What do you mean, missing?" The nanny, Ms. Parker, stepped out after the incident. When she returned, Ivy was gone. "We're searching now." 40 minutes. That's how long it took them to find her. 40 minutes during which Elena abandoned the Seattle deal and tore through the building on foot, taking stairs instead of waiting for elevators, her heart a drum against her ribs. 40 minutes imagining every nightmare scenario. Ivy on the street, Ivy hurt, Ivy gone the way Daniel was gone, vanished into a world that took people without warning or mercy. They found her on the 12th floor, in the janitor's break room that wasn't supposed to be accessible to anyone outside facility staff. Security protocols, badge access, all the expensive systems Elena had installed to keep her daughter safe, rendered useless by a 7-year-old who'd observed patterns and exploited blind spots with the strategic thinking she'd inherited from both parents. Ivy had known the shift change happened at 6:15, had watched custodial staff enough to memorize the service elevator code, had chosen the 12th floor because a security camera outside the break room had been broken for 2 weeks, a maintenance backlog issue that now felt like criminal negligence. She'd slipped through the gaps in their expensive net with the ease of water finding cracks. Marcus had been organizing cleaning supplies when the door burst open. A small tornado in a designer dress rushed in, wild-eyed and feral, grabbing his mop like a sword. His first instinct was alarm. This wasn't his daughter. Who was this child? Where were her parents? But then he saw the look in her eyes. Not fear, Curiosity. The same expression Grace got when she discovered something new. He didn't raise his voice or reach for her or do any of the things adults typically did that made children feel cornered. He just asked a question, his tone conversational, like they were equals. "You want to help me clean?" The girl stopped mid-swing, stared at him with enormous eyes, brown like autumn leaves, assessing. He pulled out a spray bottle and a rag, moving slowly so as not to startle her. This is the secret technique. You spray 3 times, no more, no less. Then you wipe in circles. Counterclockwise, very important. The direction matters. Clockwise doesn't work. He demonstrated, making it look like magic instead of menial labor. The girl took the rag, sprayed exactly 3 times, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Wiped in careful circles, her movements deliberate. For the first time in months, though Marcus didn't know this yet, she was following directions. Not because she was forced to, but because someone had made it sound like an adventure rather than a chore. Marcus heated water in the break room microwave, mixed in cocoa powder and a splash of vanilla extract, the way Rachel used to make it. Muscle memory following a recipe his hands knew better than his head. He handed the mug to the girl, who wrapped small fingers around it like it was treasure. Then he did what he did best with Grace. He talked. Not at her, not down to her, just talked. About his daughter, their morning routine, the book about monarch butterflies they were reading together, how the butterflies flew 3,000 miles, guided by instincts they didn't understand but trusted anyway. The girl listened, perched on a folding chair, her legs swinging, a tiny smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When Elena found them 20 minutes later, she was prepared to unleash fury. She'd run from the elevator, her heels striking the floor like gunshots, her breath short from stares and fear. But when she burst through the break room door, the words died in her throat. Ivy was leaning against the janitor's shoulder, holding a mug of cocoa, telling him about the piano piece she'd been practicing. Her voice was soft, but clear, her expression peaceful in a way Elena hadn't seen since before the crash. The janitor looked up, saw the CEO, understood immediately. His expression shifted. Not fear, not deference, just recognition of the moment's fragility. He gently shifted Ivy upright, his voice kind. "Someone's here to take you home." Ivy's face closed like a door slamming shut. Elena felt the familiar knife of failure twist in her gut. But something had changed. Ivy looked back at the janitor as Elena led her away. And that look said everything. She'd found something in that break room that all the money and expertise in the world hadn't provided. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m, she sat in her office and pulled up the security footage from the break room. Watched the entire encounter frame by frame. Watched this stranger, this janitor whose name she didn't even know, treat her daughter like a person rather than a problem. Watched Ivy respond with trust instead of terror. And Elena, who hadn't cried since Daniel's funeral, who prided herself on emotional control that could freeze nitrogen, sat alone in her glass tower and wept. The next day, she did something unprecedented. She went to the basement level where the facility staff gathered, a place she'd never visited in 8 years of running this company. Found him refilling his cleaning cart, looking tired but content. When she spoke, her voice came out harsher than intended. The CEO tone she couldn't quite turn off, even when she wanted to. "I need to speak with you." He followed her to a small conference room, standing rather than sitting, maintaining the invisible line between employer and employee. Elena got straight to the point because that's what she did, had always done, the only way she knew how to operate. "My daughter only talks to you. I don't understand why, but I'm offering you a temporary position. Help her communicate. Spend time with her. Just be whatever it is you were yesterday. I'll triple your current salary." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. She watched calculations run behind his eyes. Not greed, something more complex. When he spoke, his voice was steady. With respect, ma'am, you can't buy what your daughter needs. Elena's jaw tightened. The refusal stung more than it should have. Rejection in a form she wasn't accustomed to receiving. She tried again, the only tool she had. Name your price. There is no price. He said it simply, without judgment, but without surrender. But if you're asking me to spend time with your daughter, I'll do it. Not for money, because no child should feel as alone as she clearly does. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Not cruel. He wasn't being cruel, just honest. Honest in a way people hadn't been with her in years, maybe ever. Everyone wanted something from her: money, influence, access. This man in a janitor's uniform was refusing what she offered and offering what she couldn't buy. She tried to regain control, to put this on terms she understood. Then I'll create a formal position, benefits, a contract. He cut her off, polite but firm. If this is about paperwork and liability, I'm not interested. Either you trust me or you don't. Standoff. Elena, unused to anyone refusing her authority, her ability to shape the world through sheer force of will and capital. But he was right. This wasn't something she could contract. It required trust, the one currency she had spent down to nothing since Daniel died. Finally, she nodded. After your shift ends, 1 hour daily. If Ivy's uncomfortable, the arrangement stops. The arrangement caused immediate uproar. Senior executives whispered in elevators, their voices carrying that particular frequency of workplace gossip. HR submitted concerned memos about protocols and liability. Patricia Morris, the HR director, brought a stack of forms that needed signing. Background checks, insurance waivers, documentation to protect the company from lawsuits that might arise from allowing non-qualified personnel access to the CEO's minor child. Warren Blackwell, senior vice president and the man who'd been passed over when the board chose Elena after Daniel's death, made his position clear in a meeting with the CFO. 58 years old, silver-haired with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. She's losing it, David. First, the Seattle delay because she had to handle a family emergency, and now she's hiring the janitor to play therapist. The woman's grief is compromising her judgment. David Morrison, CFO, and Elena's ally for the past 6 years, shifted uncomfortably. She's still delivering results. Revenue's up 31%. For now. But board members are asking questions. How long before this affects the bottom line? Warren planted seeds carefully, positioning himself as concerned colleague rather than opportunist. Marcus, mopping the floor outside that conference room, heard every word through the door they'd left ajar. Heard himself reduced to the janitor. His daughter invisible. His life a weapon being sharpened against the woman who'd asked him for help. Elena overrode them all with a blunt instrument of her authority. She didn't explain or justify, just declared the arrangement approved and dared anyone to challenge her. They didn't. But the whispers continued, spreading through the building like mold in darkness. Marcus started coming to Ivy's suite after his shift ended. No structured lessons, no therapy techniques from manuals written by people who'd never known real loss. He taught her to water the plants on the terrace, explaining how roots needed both water and air to breathe. Too much of either, and they'd drown. He showed her how to organize her books by color, chaos into rainbow order. The satisfaction of visible progress. He brought his guitar, hadn't played it in 7 years, the case gathering dust in his apartment closet because music reminded him too much of Rachel, of studio sessions where they'd fallen in love between takes. But for Ivy, he made an exception. Taught her simple chords, her small fingers struggling to press the strings, his larger hands guiding hers until she found the notes. And he listened. When Ivy talked about her father, haltingly at first, then in rushing sentences, Marcus didn't offer platitudes about heaven or time healing wounds. He just nodded, understanding in his silence. Missing someone never really stops, but it can become softer, like a stone in your pocket. You always know it's there, but it doesn't cut anymore. Ivy understood that in a way the therapist's careful explanations had never reached. The grief didn't go away. She just learned to carry it differently. One afternoon, Elena came to collect Ivy for dinner and found her daughter asleep on the couch, her head resting on Marcus's shoulder. He'd been reading to her from a book about constellations, how ancient peoples had connected dots in the sky to make meaning from chaos. His finger was marking the place on the page, his other arm loose around Ivy's shoulders. He looked up when Elena entered, put his finger to his lips, the universal gesture for silence. Elena stood frozen in the doorway. Her daughter hadn't slept peacefully in 18 months, had fought bedtime like it was an enemy, woken screaming from nightmares about planes falling from the sky. Now, she slept like childhood should allow, peaceful, safe, trusting that the world would be there when she woke. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not attraction, not yet. Something more fundamental. Recognition. This man had given her daughter something she'd been desperately searching for, the simple gift of being understood. That evening, after Ivy was in bed, Elena sat in her office and pulled up Marcus's employee file. The screen glowed in the dark office, numbers and dates telling a story in fragments. High school diploma, no college. Previous employment, senior sound engineer, Platinum Sound Studios, left 7 years ago. Reason for leaving? Family circumstances. She saw the gaps in his resume, the obvious step down from engineer to janitor. She Googled his name. Curiosity that felt like violation, but that she couldn't resist. Found articles from 8 years ago. Rising star Marcus Hayes, the sound genius behind the Platinum Records. A photograph of him at 27, standing behind a mixing board with Grammy-nominated artists. Awards in the background. Interview clips where he talked about music like other men talked about God. His hands moved as he spoke, shaping sound in the air, explaining how he captured the space between notes where emotion lived. Then nothing. A cliff edge where his career fell into silence. She pieced it together. He'd left at the height of his success, right when his wife would have been pregnant or sick. Had sacrificed everything, fame, money, the work he clearly loved, for family, for love, for responsibility. Elena compared it to her own choices. She'd built an empire, lost her daughter in the process. The contrast was painful enough to make her close the laptop and pour herself a drink she didn't finish. The whispers started small, but grew like mold in darkness. The CEO was spending too much time on the 12th floor. The janitor was always in her daughter's suite. People invented explanations that fit their understanding of the world. He must be after her money. She must be having some kind of breakdown, reaching for comfort in inappropriate places. The gossip spread through break rooms and happy hours, gaining detail and venom with each retelling. It reached the board of directors within a week. 3 of them requested an emergency meeting. Men in their 60s who'd known Daniel, who'd voted Elena into the CEO position because she'd proven herself more ruthless than any of them. They sat across from her in the boardroom, concern written on faces that had never shown her concern before. "This looks inappropriate, Elena. Your judgment may be compromised." Elena's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "My judgment built this company's revenue by 31% in 2 years. When your judgment accomplishes the same, we'll discuss appropriateness." But the pressure mounted. Shareholders called with carefully phrased concerns. PR prepared crisis management strategies for scandals that hadn't happened yet, but that they could imagine with the precision of professional pessimists. Photographers from tabloids started lurking outside the building, hoping to catch something scandalous to sell to readers hungry for stories about the wealthy falling. Marcus heard about it from other employees, saw the looks he was getting from security, from colleagues who'd been friendly before and now avoided eye contact. One evening, he didn't show up to Ivy's suite, or the next. By the third day, Ivy had stopped speaking again, the progress vanishing like it had never existed. Elena found him in the parking garage, about to leave, his old Honda Civic parked in the employee section, far from the executive spaces where her Mercedes waited. She didn't care who saw, didn't care about protocols or appearances or what the board would say. She just walked up to him and spoke the truth. "You're leaving because of the rumors. I'm leaving because staying hurts your reputation. And maybe your daughter deserves better than a father figure who causes her mother problems." Elena stepped closer. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the sounds of the city muffled by concrete. "You did what dozens of trained professionals couldn't do. You reached my daughter. Don't you dare walk away because some bitter people can't understand that." Her voice cracked on the last word. Marcus looked at her and saw past the designer clothes and the authority to the desperate mother underneath. The woman who'd built walls so high she'd trapped herself inside them. "Please, she needs you." The last two words cost her everything. Elena Castellano, who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, was begging a janitor not to leave. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll stay." The night the storm hit, Ivy was already on edge. The weather forecast had predicted severe thunderstorms, high winds, possible flooding. Everyone who worked with Ivy knew what that meant. Her father's plane had gone down in a storm. Every crack of thunder was a trigger, every flash of lightning a traumatic reminder. Elena canceled her evening meetings and stayed in the penthouse with Ivy, watching her daughter curl into herself as the sky darkened. The first thunderclap sent Ivy into a full panic attack, her small body rigid with terror, hands clawing at her own arms like she could tear the fear out through skin. Elena tried to hold her, but Ivy fought like a trapped animal, screaming, "The plane is falling! Daddy! The plane!" The on-call psychiatrist was 30 minutes away in traffic. Elena tried techniques the therapist had taught. Count to 10. Breathe deeply. Ground yourself in the present. Nothing worked. Ivy couldn't hear her, couldn't see her, was lost in a memory of the moment her world ended, reliving it with the vividness of trauma that never faded. Then Marcus appeared in the doorway, soaked from rain, still in his work clothes. He'd been leaving when the storm started, had known what it would do to Ivy, and run back. Didn't ask permission, just sat on the floor next to her and started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. His voice was steady as stone, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Ivy's eyes found his through her panic, desperate for an anchor. "Breathe in for 4 counts, Ivy. Listen to my voice. 1, 2, 3, 4. He matched his breathing to the counts, exaggerating the inhales and exhales so she could see his chest rise and fall. Slowly, impossibly, Ivy's breathing began to match his rhythm. He started humming the lullaby from that first day, Rachel's song, the melody carrying them both through the storm. Elena knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face, and placed her hand over Ivy's. The three of them stayed there on the floor as the storm raged outside. Marcus's voice steady as a lighthouse, Ivy's panic gradually subsiding, Elena's walls finally crumbling. When Ivy finally fell asleep, exhausted and hollowed out, Marcus carried her to bed. Elena followed, watching him tuck her daughter in with practiced gentleness born from 7 years of solo parenting. In the doorway of Ivy's room, Elena whispered, "How did you know to do that?" "My wife used to have panic attacks during the difficult pregnancy. I learned." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Fear is just energy with nowhere to go. You have to give it a path." Elena looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, not as an employee, not as a convenient solution to her problem, but as a person who understood pain and chose kindness anyway. The conversation happened late that night, after Ivy was deeply asleep and the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glittering. Elena poured 2 glasses of whiskey, expensive stuff she usually saved for closing deals, and handed one to Marcus. They sat in her office, the city spread below them like scattered diamonds. 2 people who'd become accidental allies. My husband was on a business trip to London, private jet. They said it was mechanical failure. Elena stared into her glass, the amber liquid catching lamplight. I've read the reports 100 times, trying to find someone to blame. There was no one, just bad luck and worse weather. She took a long sip, the whiskey burning down her throat. Daniel was the dreamer. I was the operator. He'd have these wild ideas about charity initiatives and sustainable investing, and I'd figure out how to make them profitable. We were a good team. Her voice dropped. And then one morning, I got a call. Suddenly, I was alone with a 5.5-year-old who watched her father leave and never saw him come back. Ivy used to be so bright, curious about everything. After the crash, it was like someone turned off a light inside her, and I didn't know how to turn it back on. She met Marcus's eyes across the space between them. I'm good at business, at strategy, at making hard decisions, but I couldn't save my own daughter from her grief. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain that had been worn smooth by years. My wife was a singer, Rachel. She had this voice that could make you cry even when she was singing about grocery lists. We met at a studio session. I was mixing her demo. She sang a song she'd written about hope, and I fell in love right there behind the soundboard. He smiled at the memory, something genuine breaking through the exhaustion. When she got pregnant, we were terrified and thrilled. But her blood pressure kept spiking. The doctor said bed rest, said it would be fine. The smile faded. It wasn't fine. She hemorrhaged during delivery. They had to choose, her or the baby. She made the choice before they could ask me. Left a note with the nurse. Save our daughter. Her name is Grace. Tell her I'm in every song she'll ever hear. His hands tightened around the glass. For the first year, I was just surviving. Bottles and diapers and this screaming infant who needed so much, and I had nothing left to give. I hated the world, hated Rachel for leaving me, hated myself for being angry at her. He looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. But Grace kept growing, kept changing. One day she smiled at me, really smiled, and I understood. Rachel's last gift wasn't just our daughter. It was the choice to keep loving even when it hurts. Elena's tears fell openly now. Salt tracks down carefully made-up cheeks. I don't know how to do that. I shut down after Daniel died. Threw myself into work because numbers don't leave you. Markets don't crash in planes. I thought I was protecting Ivy by being strong, but I was just hiding. You're not hiding anymore. Marcus's voice was gentle. You're here. You asked for help. That's not weakness. That's love. The words hung between them, profound in their simplicity. Elena realized she hadn't talked about Daniel, really talked, not the sanitized version she gave journalists, since the funeral. This janitor with kind eyes and calloused hands had given her something she didn't know she needed, permission to be human again. The silence stretched, comfortable and uncomfortable at once. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, 2 people sat with their grief between them, like a third presence, acknowledged and bearable because shared. Marcus stood first, setting down his empty glass. It's late. Grace is with a neighbor. I should go. Elena stood too, the moment ending, but something having shifted between them that neither could name yet. Thank you. For tonight. For Ivy. For this. At the door, Marcus turned back. Elena, Miss Castellano, I mean. He fumbled, having used her first name accidentally. The intimacy of the conversation making formal address feel wrong. Elena is fine. When we're like this. He nodded and left quickly, both of them aware that something had begun that they didn't have words for yet. Elena stood alone in her office, touching the window where his reflection had been moments before, whispered to the glass, "What am I doing?" Across the city, Marcus sat in the subway with his head in his hands, thinking the same thing. But the next morning, Warren Blackwell reviewed the security logs and noted that Marcus Hayes had arrived at the executive level at 10:15 p.m. and left at 1:30, made a note in a file he was building, smiled slowly to himself. Interesting. 10 weeks dissolved into a pattern that felt inevitable, like water finding its level. Marcus arrived at the penthouse at 5:30 each evening, Ivy waiting by the window, watching for him. Grace visited twice weekly, the girls inseparable within minutes, building elaborate games that spanned days. Elena found herself extending business dinners to get home earlier, declining invitations that would keep her away past 8 when Marcus typically left. The transformation in Ivy was undeniable. Full sentences became paragraphs. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then genuine. Piano practice shifted from obligation to joy. But Elena noticed other changes too. The way she watched Marcus's hands demonstrate guitar chords, how her breath caught when he smiled, the hyper-awareness of his presence that had nothing to do with gratitude. Marcus still worked his janitor shift, 6 to 3, arriving at the penthouse exhausted, but never showing it to Ivy. Elena had offered 3 times to create a formal position with benefits, eliminate the pretense of him mopping floors he was overqualified to clean. Each time, he refused. "I'm not going to be a kept man. I work for my living." The pride in his voice was steel wrapped in velvet, immovable. Elena recognized it because she carried the same pride, just expressed differently. They were both people who'd built identities on not needing rescue. The office gossip had intensified from whispers to open speculation. Marcus's car appeared in the security logs every evening. People noticed the CEO leaving earlier, smiling more. The Ice Queen thawing in ways that made longtime employees exchange significant glances. Patricia Morris from HR submitted another memo about documentation and improper procedures. Warren Blackwell collected evidence like a prosecutor building a case. Elena ignored them all with the blunt force of her authority, but the pressure built like steam in a sealed container. Week 7 brought the first real test. Marcus arrived soaked from an unexpected downpour, his uniform clinging to him, water dripping onto the marble foyer. "You need to change. You'll get sick." Elena's voice carried more concern than she intended. She disappeared into her bedroom, returned with a shirt still wrapped in dry cleaning plastic. One of Daniel's. She'd kept his clothes in the guest closet, unable to donate them, unable to look at them. Until now. Marcus took the shirt to the bathroom. When he emerged, Elena's heart performed acrobatics she hadn't felt in years. Seeing another man in her dead husband's clothes should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it felt like permission. "Daniel would have liked you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Marcus's expression went carefully neutral. "I never met him." "I know. But he would have. You're the kind of man he respected. Someone who puts family first." She busied herself making coffee, needing something to do with her hands. That evening they cooked dinner together while the girls watched a movie. Marcus chopped onions with the precision of someone who'd learned knife skills somewhere other than a home kitchen. Elena boiled pasta, following package directions because cooking had never been her strength. Their hands collided, reaching for the olive oil. Both froze. The contact lasted 3 seconds too long. "Sorry." His voice came out rougher than usual. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. The air between them had changed, charged with something neither was ready to name. Grace's voice carried from the living room. "Daddy! Ivy wants to show me something!" They stepped apart like teenagers caught by parents, the moment broken but not forgotten. By week 8, Warren made his move. The quarterly board meeting arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. Elena presented results that should have silenced criticism. Revenue up 33% year over year, client retention at 95%, market share gains in every sector they competed in. Warren waited until she finished, then struck with surgical precision. "Impressive numbers, Elena, truly, but we need to discuss the Seattle expansion delay. That cost us a $12 million opportunity. Family emergency. I explained this in my written report. Of course, and no one questions your dedication. But that's exactly my concern. Personal life affecting professional judgment. Multiple employees have noticed you leaving early, seeming distracted in meetings." Patricia Morris cleared her throat. The HR director's timing too perfect to be coincidental. "I submitted a memo 3 weeks ago regarding unvetted personnel having access to a minor child on company premises. It still hasn't been addressed." Elena felt the trap closing. This wasn't about protocols. It was about control. About men who'd never fully accepted a woman in the CEO chair, finding an excuse to question her authority. "The personnel in question has helped my daughter more than 9 licensed professionals. I'm addressing a family crisis with an unconventional solution. That's leadership, not poor judgment." Warren's smile never reached his eyes. "No one's questioning your intentions. We're simply concerned about optics. Shareholders are asking questions. The stock dipped 4% last week on speculation about leadership stability, because of rumors you've been feeding them." Elena didn't bother making it a question. The room went silent. Warren's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's an observation, one I'm sure the board can evaluate independently." The vote came swiftly. Warren's proposal for enhanced oversight, monthly board reviews instead of quarterly, ethics committee with veto power over certain decisions, mandatory disclosure of personal relationships that might affect judgment. 5 votes in favor, 3 opposed. Elena kept her position, but lost autonomy. The victory felt like defeat. She returned to her office and closed the door, leaning against it in the silence of her glass tower. Through the window, Manhattan glittered, indifferent to one woman's crisis of authority and purpose. Warren had won without firing her. Death by 1,000 cuts instead of a single blow. Week 9 brought Grace's dental emergency. Marcus took a call in the hallway, his voice tight with the stress Elena recognized from her own financial calculations. "I know the specialist costs more. Just schedule the appointment. I'll figure it out." Elena had overheard enough to understand. Later, when Marcus returned to Ivy's session, she tried to help. "I couldn't help hearing about Grace's dental work. Let me cover it. Call it a bonus, or—" "No." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Absolutely not. Marcus, this is your daughter's health, which makes it my responsibility, not yours." Elena felt the sting of rejection. "This isn't about pride." Marcus's jaw worked. "It's exactly about pride. It's all I have left. With respect, I've been handling Grace's life for 7 years without rescue from anyone. You shouldn't have to handle everything alone. Neither should you. But here we are." He walked away before she could argue further. That night, Elena researched pediatric dental charities, found one that provided comprehensive care for children of low-income families, made an anonymous donation of $50,000 with specific instructions that a 7-year-old named Grace Hayes in Astoria, Queens, should qualify for their scholarship program. 3 days later, Marcus mentioned to her, cautiously, like sharing something miraculous, that Grace had been accepted into a program that would cover the surgery completely. "I don't know how this happened. The dentist said someone recommended us. It feels like a miracle." Elena smiled, keeping her secret. Maybe someone's looking out for you. Sometimes the universe provides. She let him believe it. Some gifts were better given invisibly. Week 10 arrived with Ivy's insistence that they all go Christmas shopping together. The first time Marcus, Elena, and both girls would appear in public as a unit. Something that looked suspiciously like a family. Frau Schwartz was a cathedral of childhood wonder, 3 stories of toys lit up like a festival. Ivy and Grace raced ahead, pointing at displays, arguing playfully about which stuffed animals had the best personalities. Marcus walked beside Elena, maintaining careful distance that felt more obvious than touching would have. A sales clerk approached with the practiced smile of someone working on commission. "Your daughters are adorable. Family Christmas shopping?" Neither Marcus nor Elena corrected the assumption. The lie of omission felt heavier than truth. Ivy selected a monarch butterfly plush for Grace, remembering her friend's obsession. Elena reached for her credit card. Marcus's hand caught her wrist. "I can buy my daughter's gift. It's from Ivy. Let her give it." Elena pulled free gently, completed the transaction before he could protest further. She watched his pride war with practicality, saw the moment he chose to let it go rather than make a scene in front of the girls. Outside, they stopped for hot chocolate at a street vendor. The afternoon had turned crisp, the kind of December cold that bit through expensive coats and cheap ones alike. Steam rose from paper cups as they stood on the corner, watching the girls make faces at pigeons. "This isn't real," Marcus spoke quietly, not looking at her. "We're pretending to be something we're not." Elena's chest constricted. "What if I'm not pretending?" He turned to face her then, and she saw fear in his eyes. "Elena, look around. You're a CEO. I mop floors. This is a fairy tale, and fairy tales don't work in real life." "This isn't a fairy tale. This is 2 people who care about each other. Caring isn't enough. When this ends, and it will end, Ivy and Grace lose each other. I won't let my daughter be hurt because I couldn't keep perspective." "What makes you so sure it would end?" "Because I know how the world works. I've lived it." The moment shattered when Grace called for Marcus to settle a dispute about hot chocolate temperature. He went to her, leaving Elena standing alone with the taste of rejection bitter on her tongue. What she didn't know was that a photographer had been following them for the past hour. Warren's private investigator hired to document exactly this kind of outing. The photos hit tabloid websites the next morning. Marcus and Elena at FAO Schwartz, standing close while children played nearby. Elena paying for expensive toys, the 4 of them sharing hot chocolate like a family. The headline screamed its judgment. "Billionaire CEO's new romance? Struggling janitor targets wealthy widow." The story went viral within hours. Social media exploded with commentary. "Gold digger. She's using him for grief therapy. He's after her money." Beautiful story of love across class. The internet had opinions and no shortage of platforms to share them. Elena's phone became unusable. 200 missed calls before she turned it off. Investors, PR team, lawyers, board members, everyone had advice, warnings, strategies. The company stock dipped 5% on speculation about CEO judgment being compromised. Marcus faced his own harassment. Reporters camped outside his apartment building. Photographers followed him to Grace's school, forcing the principal to call security. At work, colleagues who'd been friendly for 6 years suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere when he entered the break room. Frank Williams, his closest work friend, pulled him aside. "Man, you should have told me you were involved with her. This is complicated." "I'm not involved with her. I'm helping her daughter." "That's not what it looks like in the photos." Marcus had no answer for that. Warren called an emergency board meeting within 48 hours of the scandal breaking. His presentation was professionally designed. Every slide calculated to look like concern rather than opportunism. He showed metrics of Elena's distraction. 40 instances in 10 weeks where she'd left the office before 6 p.m. The Seattle expansion delay and its $12 million opportunity cost. Anonymous employee complaints about an inappropriate relationship being conducted on company premises. Stock price correlation with scandal news. Shareholder calls expressing concern about fiduciary duty. This isn't about Elena's personal life. It's about whether personal circumstances are affecting her ability to lead. I'm not suggesting termination. I'm proposing a 6-month leave of absence. She retains her board seat, her equity, her voice in major decisions. I serve as interim CEO while our colleague heals from trauma that would break anyone. It was a masterclass in manipulation, framing a power grab as compassion. The vote split predictably. 4 board members supported Warren immediately. 3 stood with Elena. The deciding vote belonged to David Morrison, Elena's CFO and ally for 6 years. David sat in silence for a full minute while the room waited. This is difficult. I need time to consider all the implications. He abstained. The vote was postponed for 2 weeks, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew David's hesitation meant Elena's position had become untenable. She returned to her office, closed the door, and allowed herself 5 minutes of pure rage. Threw a crystal paperweight at the wall hard enough to leave a dent in the drywall. Screamed into a pillow until her throat hurt. Then she composed herself, fixed her makeup, and went back to work. Because that's what she did. That's who she trained herself to be. Marcus made his decision in the parking garage at 11 p.m., sitting in his Civic with the engine running for heat. Grace was with his sister Laura upstate for the weekend, a trip he'd arranged thinking it would be good for her to get out of the city. Now it felt like preparation for a more permanent move. He couldn't do this to Elena. Couldn't watch her lose everything she'd built because of him. The company, her reputation, the respect she'd earned through years of ruthless competence, all of it circling the drain because she'd made the mistake of letting him into her life. He pulled out his phone, typed a message to Laura. "Can Grace and I stay with you for a while? Need to let things settle down here." Her response came within minutes. "Of course, but Marcus, running doesn't solve anything." "It solves Elena's problem. That's enough." He drove to Titanium Ventures, used his keycard to access the building at midnight when security was minimal, took the service elevator to the 47th floor, found Elena in her office, as he'd known he would. She looked up when he entered, and the hope in her eyes made what he had to do even harder. "I'm leaving, taking Grace upstate to my sister's place." Elena stood so fast, her chair rolled backward. "No, don't do this. Staying destroys your life, everything you've worked for. We can fight this together." "Fight what? Reality? I'm a janitor with $18,000 in debt. You're a CEO worth hundreds of millions. Your board wants you to resign. The stock is tanking. You'll lose everything because of what? Because of me? Because of us. Because of what we're building. We're not building anything, Elena. We're living in a fantasy. Ivy needs a mother who's stable and successful more than she needs me." "What about what I need?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "You need your empire, the board, the company, the legacy Daniel left you." "I'm not your world, Elena. I can't be." "You are my world. You and the girls." Marcus closed his eyes against the pain in her voice. When he opened them, he'd made his choice. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, pulled her against him, and kissed her with all the desperation and regret and love he'd been holding back for 10 weeks. Elena melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back like she could change his mind through sheer force of wanting. When he pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "I'm sorry. I love you too much to be the reason you lose everything." He walked out before she could argue, before he could change his mind. Left her standing alone in her office, overlooking a city that suddenly felt empty despite 8 million people breathing the same air. Elena found the letter on her desk after he'd gone, written on notebook paper in Marcus's careful handwriting. "Dear Ivy, Grief is love with nowhere to go. Your dad loved you so much that love is still alive in you. Your mom loves you more than anything in the world. Listen to her. Trust her. I have to leave for a while, but it's not because of you. You are brave, smart, and stronger than you know. Keep playing piano. Keep being Grace's friend. Remember, missing someone doesn't mean they failed you. It means they mattered. Love, Mr. Marcus. She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and locked it in her desk drawer. Couldn't bring herself to give it to Ivy yet. Couldn't make real the fact that he was gone. 6 weeks passed like a wound that wouldn't close, each day bleeding into the next with the particular ache of separation chosen for protection rather than indifference. Marcus worked construction on his brother-in-law's crew upstate, framing houses in February wind that bit through work gloves and canvas jackets. $15 an hour, cash paid at week's end, enough to contribute to Laura's household and buy Grace's school supplies, but not enough to rebuild the life he'd left behind in Queens. His hands remembered different work. Mixing boards and frequency curves, not nail guns and 2x4s. The muscle memory of creation versus the repetitive labor of construction. At night, his fingers ached from hammer strikes and cold. A different pain than the cramping he'd gotten from long studio sessions, but pain nonetheless. Grace adjusted with the resilience children carry like invisible armor, making friends with her cousins, charming Laura's neighbors, excelling in the small-town school where being new made her interesting rather than suspect. But every morning she asked the same question. "When are we going home, Daddy?" Marcus had stopped promising soon because he didn't know if home existed anymore or if he'd destroyed it by running. The apartment in Queens was gone, lease broken, furniture in Laura's storage barn. His old life dismantled in service of protecting Elena from himself, from the scandal his presence generated, from having to choose between empire and janitor. Laura found him on her porch after Grace went to bed. The 3rd consecutive night he'd pulled a beer from the garage refrigerator and stared at fields gone dark under winter constellations. She sat without invitation, 41 years old and carrying the particular wisdom of people who'd survived their own catastrophes and came out wiser rather than bitter. "You're spiraling." "I'm managing." 3 beers on a Tuesday while staring at nothing isn't managing. It's avoiding. Marcus took another pull from the bottle, the beer gone warm in his hands, but drinking it was something to do besides think. She needs to fight for her company, not for me. Ivy needs a mother who isn't drowning in scandal I created. Ivy needs a mother who's happy. You both deserve that much. And from what Grace tells me about their video chats, Ivy's regressing without you. The knowledge sat heavy in Marcus's chest. He'd written letters, 2 so far, trying to explain to a 7-year-old why adults made promises they couldn't keep. Why sometimes love meant leaving. Why the world was complicated in ways that defied the simple logic of a child's heart. The letters felt inadequate even as he mailed them. Laura pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. Rachel wouldn't want this. You running away because you're scared? I'm not scared. I'm protecting everyone. You're terrified of not being enough, of Elena choosing her empire over you. So you made the choice for her, took away her agency in the name of protection. The accuracy of it stung worse than the cold. Marcus stared at distant lights from neighboring farms, processing truth he'd been avoiding. What if I go back and she's moved on, built walls I can't get through? Then at least you tried. But Marcus, from what Grace says, Elena is not moving on. She's fighting for the company, for Ivy, for the foundation she's planning. Maybe she's fighting for you too, and you're just not there to see it. Marcus finished his beer in silence, Laura's words settling into the space where certainty used to live. Elena's fight happened in boardrooms and conference calls, in negotiations with lawyers and consultants who billed by the quarter hour. She attended the reconvened board meeting dressed in navy, her armor of choice when war was inevitable. Warren presented his case again, with David Morrison's vote still hanging in the balance. But this time, Elena didn't defend. She attacked. Pulled out documentation of Warren's communications with shareholders, the carefully timed leaks to media, the private investigators' invoices that traced back to his discretionary budget. Evidence she'd spent 2 weeks gathering with the help of a forensic accountant who owed her a favor. "You want my job, Warren? Just be honest about it instead of hiding behind concern." The room went silent. Warren's expression hardened into something closer to his true nature.
Your personal choices made you vulnerable. I simply recognized an opportunity.
Then let's put it to a vote. Either I have this board's confidence or I don't. No conditions, no oversight committees. All or nothing. David Morrison spoke for the first time. "I've spent 6 years working with Elena. Watched her build this company's value by billions. One unconventional personal decision doesn't erase that track record. I vote confidence." The final tally was 5-3. Elena kept her position. But the cost was visible in the lines around her eyes, the weight she'd lost, the exhaustion that no amount of expensive skincare could hide. She'd won, but it felt like losing. That night, she drafted a letter of resignation. Not immediate, 6 months to ensure a smooth transition. Long enough to fulfill her fiduciary duty, short enough to reclaim her life before she forgot what living felt like. She researched foundations for grieving children, programs that helped kids process trauma through art and music and community. Daniel had dreamed of this before the Atlantic took him, had talked late at night about using their wealth for something more meaningful than quarterly earnings. Elena would build it in his memory, and Rachel's, for Ivy and Grace and all the children who'd learned too young that love didn't guarantee permanence. The decision felt like shedding skin she'd outgrown, painful in the way growth always was, liberating in ways she hadn't anticipated. She told no one yet, just researched and planned and felt something like hope beginning to displace the emptiness that had lived in her chest since Daniel died. Marcus saw the news online 4 weeks into his upstate exile. The headline made him set down his coffee mid-sip. Titanium Ventures CEO announces new foundation, Hayes Castellano Foundation for Grieving Children. He read the article 3 times, his heart hammering. Elena Castellano, CEO of Titanium Ventures, announced plans today for a new charitable foundation dedicated to providing art and music therapy for children who have lost parents. The foundation will be named Hayes Castellano, honoring both her late husband, Daniel Castellano, and Rachel Hayes, a singer who died 7 years ago during childbirth. "Every child deserves support when facing loss," Castellano stated. "This foundation will provide that support through creative expression and community." Marcus's vision blurred. She'd named it after Rachel, after his wife, after his family. She was walking away from her empire and putting his wife's name on the door. Laura found him at the kitchen table an hour later, still staring at the screen. "She named it after Rachel. I see that. Why would she do that?" Laura sat across from him, her expression gentle. "Because she loves you, you idiot. Because she's choosing what matters. And you ran away." Marcus put his head in his hands. "I thought I was protecting her." "You were protecting yourself. From hoping. From risking your heart again. From the possibility that you might deserve to be happy." The words landed like punches. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus went to Laura's attic where she'd stored boxes from his old apartment, found the container she'd labeled personal, handle with care. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was Rachel's journal. Laura had saved it after the funeral when Marcus couldn't bear to look at anything that reminded him of what he'd lost. He opened it with shaking hands, turned to the last entry, dated the night before Grace was born. "If something happens to me tomorrow, I need Marcus to know. 1, I chose this. I chose our baby. No regrets. 2, he will be the best father. I've watched him with our friends' kids. Gentle, patient, present. Our daughter is so lucky. 3, tell him to love again, Please. He has so much love to give. Don't let him shut down. 4. Tell Grace. Mommy is in every song Daddy plays, every note he hears, every moment he's brave enough to open his heart. 5. Tell Marcus. Brave love means showing up even when you're scared. I love you both. Forever. Rachel Marcus broke. 7 years of held-back grief crashing through the walls he'd built. He sobbed like he hadn't since the day they'd placed Grace in his arms and told him Rachel was gone. When he could breathe again, he understood. Rachel hadn't wanted him to stop living. She'd wanted him to be brave enough to love again. And he'd been running from that bravery for 7 years. Meanwhile, Ivy and Grace maintained their video calls with the determination of children who understood adult stupidity better than adults did themselves. Mom's really sad. Grace's voice came through Elena's laptop speakers, where Ivy sat cross-legged on her bed. Your daddy too? Yeah, he pretends he's not, but I hear him at night. We have to do something. Ivy's face set with the same determination Elena wore when negotiating deals. The annual arts gala. Grace's eyes lit up with understanding. We could perform. They'd been practicing Where Love Lives for months, the song that combined Rachel's melody with lyrics they'd written together about loss and hope and family found in unexpected places. Can you get your daddy to come? Grace bit her lip. I can try, but Ivy, he's scared. Adults are always scared. That's why kids have to be brave for them sometimes. The next day, Ivy registered for the gala performance using skills that would have impressed a forger. Traced over one of Elena's old signatures on a permission slip using thin paper and a steady hand. 7-year-old ingenuity defeating security measures designed by adults who underestimated children. Grace worked on Marcus with the patient persistence of someone who'd inherited her mother's ability to persuade. Daddy, Ivy needs you for her performance. It's really important. Please come back. Just once. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing Rachel's determination in Grace's eyes. Your mom, Elena, she's been through enough because of me. But you love her, and she loves you. Aunt Laura told me. Marcus realized Grace had overheard more than he'd thought. Sweetheart, sometimes love isn't enough. Grace pulled out her phone, showed him the lyrics they'd written, the song he'd helped them create. The chorus read, Love still lives in the brave who choose. Love still wins when you're brave to lose. Did you lie when you wrote this with us? The question gutted him. No, I didn't lie. Then show up, Daddy. Be brave like Mommy wanted. Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms and held on tight, making a decision that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. One more time. For Ivy. And maybe, if he was honest, for himself. The resignation letter sat in Elena's desk drawer for 3 weeks before she showed it to anyone. The document was simple, professional, devoid of the emotion that had gone into writing it. 6 months' notice. Recommendation for David Morrison as successor. Commitment to smooth transition. She scheduled a meeting with the board for a Tuesday morning in early March, when the city was still deciding whether to embrace spring or cling to winter's last gasps. Warren arrived early, coffee in hand, clearly expecting another battle over oversight protocols or quarterly targets. His expression shifted from confident to confused when Elena distributed copies of her letter. Effective September 1st, I'm resigning as CEO of Titanium Ventures. I'll retain my board seat but step down from daily operations. David Morrison will assume the role, pending board approval. Warren recovered quickly. This is an emotional decision, Elena. You should take time to reconsider. I've had 18 months to reconsider. I'm choosing what matters. The Hayes Castellano Foundation launches in 6 months. That's where my energy needs to be. The foundation named after a janitor's dead wife and your husband? This is exactly the kind of judgment. His voice carried the same condescending tone he'd used when questioning her decisions. Elena cut him off with surgical precision. The foundation named after two people who understood that love matters more than corporate titles. Yes, Warren, that foundation. The one that will help children like my daughter who lost parents too young. The one that will do more good than another year of shareholder value ever could. She stood, gathering her materials. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of my decision. 6 months to ensure stability. Then I'm done. The room sat in stunned silence as she walked out. David Morrison found her in her office an hour later, holding her letter. You're serious about this? Completely. Because of the janitor? Elena's jaw tightened at the reduction of Marcus to a job title, but she kept her voice level. Because I finally understand what my husband tried to tell me before he died. That there's more to life than winning. That being present for the people you love matters more than any deal you'll ever close. David sat across from her, turning the letter over in his hands. For what it's worth, I think you're right. I've watched you build this company while losing yourself. Maybe it's time you found what you lost. Will you take the position? If the board approves. But Elena, you know Warren won't let this go quietly. Let him try. I'm past caring what Warren thinks. The announcement went public the following week. Business media covered it with the breathless excitement usually reserved for scandal. CEO walks away from empire to build charity. The narrative practically wrote itself. Social media split predictably, half calling her crazy for abandoning a Fortune 500 company, half praising her courage to choose purpose over profit. The internet had opinions, as always. Elena ignored it all, focused instead on building something that mattered. She hired nonprofit consultants who specialized in grief counseling programs, researched best practices from similar organizations across the country, interviewed potential staff members who'd survived their own losses and wanted to help others navigate the same dark waters. The work consumed her in ways that quarterly earnings reports never had. This felt real, urgent, important in a way that shareholder value had stopped feeling somewhere between Daniel's death and Ivy's first panic attack. Ivy watched her mother transform with a careful observation children develop when their world has already shattered once. You're really leaving the company? Yes. In 6 months, I'm nobody's CEO anymore. Because of Mr. Marcus? Elena chose honesty over comfort. Because I finally understand that you need me more than the board does. And because Mr. Marcus showed me that being brave enough to choose what matters is harder than just doing what's expected. Ivy absorbed this, her 7-year-old brain processing adult complexities with surprising sophistication. He would be proud. The simple statement made Elena's throat tighten. I hope so, sweetheart. While Elena built her exit strategy, Marcus fought his own battles upstate. Construction work paid bills but left him hollow. The satisfaction of creating music, of capturing emotion in sound waves, had been replaced by the dull repetition of physical labor. His hands blistered and calloused in new patterns. The calluses from guitar strings faded, replaced by roughness from hammer handles and 2x4s. Grace adapted better than he did, made friends at her new school, learned to love Laura's cooking, discovered a talent for painting that Rachel would have nurtured with fierce pride. But every night at dinner, she asked the same question with variations. When can we go home? When things settle down. It's been 6 weeks, Daddy. Things look pretty settled to me. Marcus had no good answer for that. Laura confronted him on a Friday night after Grace had gone to bed and Marcus was nursing his 3rd beer on the porch. The temperature had climbed into the 40s, winter finally loosening its grip, mud season approaching with all its messy transformation. You're running away. I'm giving Elena space to fix her life. Her life doesn't need fixing. Yours does. Marcus took a long pull from the bottle, warm and bitter. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been hiding behind Rachel's death for 7 years, using grief as an excuse not to risk your heart again. Now you found someone who makes you feel alive, and you're terrified. I'm protecting everyone. Elena was going to lose her company because of me. So you made the decision for her, took away her choice. Very protective. The sarcasm landed like a slap. Laura pulled her jacket tighter, spring evening still carrying winter's bite. Rachel wouldn't want this. You know she wouldn't. Don't use my dead wife to... She left you a roadmap, Marcus. In that journal you finally read. She wanted you to love again, to show Grace what brave love looks like. Instead, you're showing her that running away is easier than staying. Marcus stood abruptly, the beer bottle dangling from his fingers. I stayed for 10 weeks. I helped Ivy. I did what Elena asked. And then you ran the moment it got hard, the moment it required you to actually risk something. What was I supposed to risk? Elena's entire career, her reputation, everything she built? Your heart. That's what love requires. Not protection, not martyrdom. Just showing up, even when you're scared. The words echoed something Rachel had written. Brave love means showing up, even when you're scared. Marcus sank back into the chair, the fight draining out of him. What if I show up and she doesn't want me anymore? What if 6 weeks was enough for her to realize I'm not worth the trouble? Then at least you'll know. But Marcus, from what Grace tells me about those video calls, Elena hasn't moved on. She named a foundation after your wife. She's walking away from an empire. Maybe she's waiting for you to be brave enough to meet her halfway. The foundation news had hit Marcus like a freight train when he'd seen it online. Elena putting Rachel's name alongside Daniel's, honoring a woman she'd never met because that woman had mattered to him. It was the kind of gesture that spoke louder than any declaration of love. Laura stood, preparing to head inside. Rachel gave you grace and a choice. Elena's offering you the same thing. Don't waste it. She left Marcus alone with his beer and his thoughts, and the slowly dawning realization that he'd been confusing cowardice with nobility. The gala preparation happened in secret. Ivy and Grace coordinated through video calls that Elena thought were just friendship maintenance. They practiced Where Love Lives until the notes became muscle memory, until the lyrics carried weight earned through genuine understanding of loss. Ivy registered for the performance using her traced signature technique, a forgery that would have impressed professional criminals. The program director accepted it without question. Why would a 7-year-old lie about something like this? Grace worked on Marcus with the patience of water wearing down stone. Just come for the performance, Daddy. Ivy needs you. Does Elena know you're asking me this? No, this is from me and Ivy. We need you there. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing Rachel's determination and Elena's strategic thinking combined in one small package. What if seeing me makes things worse for your mom? What if not seeing you is what's making things worse? The logic was airtight, delivered with the confidence of someone who knew she was right. Marcus called Laura into the room, where Grace immediately deployed reinforcements. Aunt Laura, tell Daddy he has to come to my performance. Laura met Marcus's eyes over Grace's head. I think that's a decision your daddy has to make himself. But Grace, your mommy used to say that love was the only thing worth being brave for. Grace nodded solemnly, then turned back to Marcus. So be brave, Daddy. The words stripped away his remaining excuses. He'd been telling himself he was protecting everyone, but really, he'd been protecting himself from the possibility of rejection, from having to risk his heart after spending 7 years keeping it safely locked away. Okay. The word came out rough, but Grace heard it clearly enough. Okay? I'll come. Just for the performance. No promises beyond that. Grace launched herself at him, wrapping small arms around his neck. Thank you, Daddy. You won't regret it. Marcus held her close, hoping she was right. Lincoln Center glittered under late March evening light, the fountains dancing in synchronized patterns while Manhattan's elite gathered for the annual arts gala. Elena attended out of obligation, her role as outgoing CEO requiring one last performance of corporate philanthropy. She wore burgundy instead of her usual black, a small rebellion that felt significant only to her. The dress was conservative, expensive, appropriate, everything she was supposed to be. The crowd had thinned compared to previous years. Some donors had quietly distanced themselves after the scandal, their absence speaking louder than any public statement. Elena noticed the gaps but didn't care. The people who mattered were still here. Warren Blackwell arrived with a date young enough to make Elena wonder if he'd learned nothing from watching her destruction. He watched her across the ballroom with the expression of someone who'd won a war they'd been fighting in shadows. Let him watch. In 6 months, he could have the whole company. David Morrison appeared at her elbow with champagne she didn't want but accepted anyway. Holding up? Counting down. 183 days until freedom. You could leave sooner. Board approved the transition plan. I'm ready to take over whenever. Elena shook her head. I owe this company a proper exit. Daniel built it with his whole heart. I won't dishonor that by slinking away. Even after everything? Especially after everything. The children's showcase began at 7, young musicians displaying the fruits of programs Titanium Ventures had funded for a decade. Elena prepared to slip out after the corporate obligation was fulfilled. Then the program director's voice came through the speakers. Our final performer tonight is Ivy Castellano, age 7, presenting an original composition. Elena's champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Ivy hadn't mentioned performing, hadn't asked permission, hadn't... Her daughter walked onto the stage wearing the navy dress from that first terrible therapy session, altered to fit her growing frame. The dress that had once symbolized struggle now represented transformation. Ivy approached the microphone with more confidence than Elena had seen in 18 months. This song is called Where Love Lives. Mr. Marcus's wife wrote the melody before she died, having his daughter Grace. This is about how love doesn't end when people leave. It just finds new places to live. Elena's vision blurred. Mr. Marcus. Present tense, like he was still part of their lives. Like Ivy hadn't accepted his absence as permanent. Ivy sat at the piano. Her hands found the keys, and the first notes drifted through the concert hall, tentative but clear. Then guitar joined from the wings. Elena's heart stopped. She knew that sound, had heard it in her penthouse, in her dreams, in the space between heartbeats where hope lived despite reason. Marcus walked onto the stage carrying the instrument Rachel had loved, dressed in slacks and a button-down that weren't quite right for Lincoln Center, but were clearly the best he owned. His eyes found Ivy first, steadying her with his presence. Then his gaze drifted to Elena in the third row, and everything he'd been holding back showed in that glance. Loneliness and love and fear and courage all tangled together. Under Marcus's support, Ivy's playing grew stronger. The notes that had started uncertain became confident. The music swelled beyond technical proficiency into raw emotional honesty that commanded attention through vulnerability rather than polish. Grace appeared from the wings, unplanned, pure impulse, and stood beside Ivy. The girls exchanged a look that needed no words. Then Grace began to sing. When the sky turns dark and the world feels cold, there's a light that stays, a hand to hold. In the space between the notes we play, love still lives. It finds a way. Her voice carried Rachel's gift, pure and clear and achingly honest. Through the grief and through the years, through the silence and the tears, what we build is what remains. Love still lives beyond the pain. Marcus's guitar wrapped around the girl's performance like arms around frightened children. Protection without smothering, support without control. The final verse hit Elena like a physical force. When the world says no and your heart says yes, when you're told to hide what you can't suppress, love still lives in the brave who choose. Love still wins when you're brave to lose. The last note rang out into silence that held for 3 perfect seconds before the audience erupted. Half the room was crying. The other half looked uncomfortable, scandalized by the raw emotion on display. Elena was already moving, walking down the aisle while hundreds of eyes watched and dozens of phones recorded. She didn't care about the optics or the headlines or what Warren would say to board members tomorrow. Ivy ran into her arms the moment Elena reached the stage. Elena held her daughter, then turned to face Marcus. He stood with his guitar, expression completely unguarded for the first time since that night in her office when he'd kissed her goodbye. "Don't leave." Her voice caught the microphone Ivy had left on, broadcasting to every corner of the concert hall. "Not again. Please don't leave again." Marcus's throat worked, swallowing words that wouldn't come. Elena shifted Ivy to her hip and walked toward him, closing distance that felt like crossing continents. "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. I'm done choosing fear over family." The crowd murmured, scandalized and fascinated in equal measure. "I've resigned. In 6 months, I'm nobody's CEO. I'm building the foundation, Hayes Castellano, for kids who lost parents too young. Ivy inspired it. You inspired it. Our daughters inspired it." Marcus stared at her, this woman who'd just announced her retirement from a billion-dollar company in front of Manhattan's elite. "You're really walking away?" "I already did. I'm walking toward something. Toward you. Toward us. If you'll have me." But instead of answering, Marcus stepped back, put physical space between them. Elena's heart plummeted. "I can't let you give up everything." "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing. There's a difference." His face twisted with internal battle. "I have nothing, Elena. No job except part-time construction, 18,000 in debt, living with my sister. I can't offer you anything except—" Ivy grabbed his hand, cutting off his spiral. "You told me brave love means showing up. So show up, Mr. Marcus." Grace appeared beside him, taking his other hand. "Please, Daddy, stop being scared." Marcus looked at the 2 girls, then at Elena, seeing the family they could become written in their faces. "I am terrified." His voice barely carried, but the microphone caught it. "So am I." Elena closed the remaining distance between them. "Be scared with me." The silence stretched. 500 people holding collective breath, waiting to see if love could actually win in the real world where money and class and scandal mattered. Marcus set down his guitar with careful deliberation. When he looked up, tears tracked down his face. "I love you. God help me. I love you." "Then that's enough." Elena reached for him, and Marcus pulled her close. The kiss was desperate, relieved, witnessed by hundreds, and recorded by dozens, a public declaration that left no room for retreat. The audience erupted, half in applause and tears, half in gasps and shock. Warren Blackwell left through a side exit, his careful maneuvering reduced to ash by a public moment he couldn't spin. David Morrison stood and started clapping louder, encouraging others to join. The standing ovation built from scattered individuals to collective roar. Ivy and Grace wrapped themselves around their parents' legs, completing the picture. 4 people on stage, choosing each other despite everything the world said should keep them apart. Backstage, away from microphones and cameras, Marcus found words again. I meant what I said. I have nothing to offer, except myself. Elena framed his face with her hands. That's everything. That's more than enough. Laura appeared, having driven down with Marcus, her face wet with happy tears. About damn time you got smart, little brother. Grace tugged on Elena's dress. Does this mean we're a family now? Elena knelt to the child's level, this girl who'd never known her mother, but who'd inherited her capacity for hope. If you'll have me. I know I'm not your mom, but can I call you Mom anyway? The question broke something open in Elena's chest. She looked at Marcus, who nodded through his tears. I would be honored. Grace threw her arms around Elena's neck, and Ivy joined the embrace, and Marcus wrapped his arms around all three of them. Press waited outside with questions shouted over each other. Elena held up a hand. No comment. This is family time. The statement was enough. They left together, a unit that hadn't existed 2 hours ago, but felt inevitable now that it had formed. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Phone calls from board members, emails from lawyers, messages from people Elena hadn't heard from in years, suddenly interested in her personal life. She ignored them all. Marcus stayed at the penthouse that night, Grace and Ivy sharing Ivy's room like they'd been sisters forever. Marcus and Elena sat in the living room until 3 a.m., talking about logistics and feelings and futures in equal measure. I still have nothing, you know. Construction pays $15 an hour. I can't afford. We pool resources. That's what partners do. Partners. He tested the word like tasting wine. Is that what we are? I hope we're more than that. But we can take it slow if you need. Marcus laughed, sharp and short. Slow? Elena, I just declared my love in front of 500 people and every camera phone in Manhattan. Slow left the building. Fair point. She leaned against him, fitting into the space under his arm like she'd been designed for it. Grace asked to call me Mom. I heard. Is that okay? More than okay. It's a gift. Ivy asked about you too. Wanted to know if you'd be her dad now. Marcus's breath caught. What did you say? That we'd figure it out together. That family doesn't always look traditional. That love matters more than labels. Good answer. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights paint shadows across the walls. I need to tell you something. Marcus's voice carried a weight that made Elena sit up. I read Rachel's journal. The last entry. She wrote it the night before Grace was born. He pulled out his phone, showed Elena a photo he'd taken of the page. Elena read it, tears falling before she'd finished the first bullet point. She wanted you to love again. She wanted me to be brave. I haven't then. Not until tonight. You were brave enough to leave your whole life behind for Grace. That's not nothing. That wasn't bravery. That was obligation. This, us. This requires actual courage. Risking my heart. Trusting that you won't disappear like Rachel did. I can't promise I'll never die, Marcus. Neither of us can. But I can promise I'll choose you every day until I do. The simplicity of it undid him. He kissed her again, slower this time. Less desperation, more discovery. When they finally pulled apart, Elena made a practical observation. We should probably get married before I introduce you as my husband to the foundation board. Is that a proposal? Pragmatic observation. Marcus grinned, the first real smile she'd seen since the gala. Then let me do this right. He slid off the couch, kneeling on the expensive rug that had probably cost more than he made in a month. Elena Castellano. I'm a janitor with debt and calluses and a 7-year-old daughter. I snore. I leave dishes in the sink. I'll probably embarrass you at fancy events because I don't know which fork to use. but I will love you with everything I have for as long as you'll let me. Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, certain, unequivocal. They married at City Hall 2 months later. Just family. Ivy, Grace, Laura, David Morrison as witness. No publicity, no fanfare. Simple vows in a municipal building that smelled like floor wax and bureaucracy. Marcus promised to show up every day, even when scared. Elena promised to choose them over empire, every single time. Ivy and Grace served as flower girls, scattering petals from grocery store bouquets down the hallway outside the clerk's office. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes. The marriage certificate cost $35. It was perfect. The adjustment period was harder than either admitted. Grace struggled with jealousy for the first month, used to having Marcus's undivided attention. Would go quiet when Elena joined them for activities or act out in small ways that signaled distress. Elena noticed but didn't push, just kept showing up, learning Grace's preferences, her favorite breakfast, pancakes with strawberries, her bedtime routine, 3 stories, back rub, lullaby, the specific way she liked her hair braided. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after the wedding. Grace had been practicing a song on the piano, something Rachel used to sing, but couldn't get the timing right. Elena offered to help, having learned piano as a child. Grace let her, reluctantly. They worked through it together, Elena demonstrating the rhythm, Grace following along. By the end, Grace was smiling. "You're not terrible at this." High praise from a 7-year-old. "Your mom would have been better, but I'll do my best." Grace studied her for a long moment. "Can I really call you Mom?" "Only if you want to. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I could never do that." "But you could be my mom too? People can have 2 moms?" "Absolutely. Your first mom gave you life and music and love. I get to give you the rest of the story." Grace climbed into Elena's lap, something she'd never done before. "Okay, Mom." The word was tentative, testing. Elena held her close, feeling the last piece of their blended family click into place. Financial reality hit when they combined households. Elena's wealth, reduced by divorce settlements and foundation endowments, still totaled $9 million. Marcus contributed $2,200 a month from teaching jobs he'd taken at 2 different music schools. The disparity could have been a problem. Marcus made it one. "I need to pay my share." "You are paying your share. You're teaching music to kids who can't afford lessons. Running the foundation's therapy program. Being a father to both girls. That's not the same as contributing financially. Money isn't the only currency that matters. Easy for you to say when you have plenty." The fight escalated from there, the first real argument since they'd married. Marcus's pride crashing against Elena's pragmatism until both were shouting in the kitchen while the girls hid in Ivy's room. Laura, visiting for the weekend, intervened. "Both of you, stop!" They turned, surprised. "Marcus, you're being an idiot. Elena, you're not listening." She looked at each of them in turn. "You need to figure out what partnership means to you, not what it meant to your previous marriages, not what society says it should look like. What works for the 2 of you?" That night they talked until dawn, worked out a system where Marcus contributed what he could financially, and Elena matched it for the foundation rather than household expenses. Let him maintain his pride while acknowledging reality. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The foundation opened 6 months after Elena's resignation became effective. They'd found a brownstone in Park Slope, 3 stories of possibility that they'd renovated together. Marcus handled the studio work, designing spaces with acoustics that rivaled professional recording facilities. Elena managed contractors, permits, and the 1,000 bureaucratic details required to turn vision into reality. The ground floor housed music studios, soundproof and equipped with instruments donated by artists Marcus had worked with in his previous life. The second floor held art therapy rooms with north-facing light and counseling offices staffed by therapists who'd survived their own losses. The third floor was administrative, Elena's domain, where nonprofit management met corporate efficiency. Opening day brought 80 people, families who'd lost parents, donors who believed in the mission, board members who'd watched Elena transform from CEO to something more meaningful. Elena spoke briefly, from the heart rather than notes. My husband Daniel dreamed of this before his plane fell from the sky. Marcus's wife Rachel inspired the music that will fill these rooms. Our daughters brought us together to build it. This foundation exists because grief is universal, but no one should face it alone. Marcus added his piece, guitar in hand. Music saved me when I couldn't speak my pain.
Art gave Grace a way to know her mother.
We're here to give other kids the same tools. Not to fix them, grief isn't broken, just to help them carry it. The first program day started with 12 children, ages 6 through 11. Marcus led music therapy in a studio that smelled like new carpet and possibility. He taught them Where Love Lives, the song that had brought his family together. An 8-year-old named Tommy, who hadn't spoken in 4 months since his mother died of cancer, played his first chord on guitar. His father wept in the observation room. Elena handled intake meetings with parents who carried the particular exhaustion of people managing their own grief while trying to support their children's. A single father brought his 6-year-old daughter, recently motherless, desperately seeking help. I understand. Elena's voice carried authority earned through experience. You're not alone here. That's what we do. We sit with the pain together until it becomes bearable. The father broke down, and Elena sat with him while he cried. Bearing witness to grief, she recognized in her own reflection. Evening came, staff departing, leaving just the family to clean up. Ivy played piano in the main studio, while Grace sang harmony they'd written that afternoon. Marcus taught a parent who'd stayed late the basics of guitar, giving the man tools to connect with his grieving son. Elena stood in the doorway watching her family, the one she'd almost missed by choosing empire over presence, and felt peace settle into her bones. Marcus caught her eye across the room, smiled the smile reserved just for her. She mouthed the words, "Love you." He mouthed back, "Brave love." Grace interrupted the moment with a request that changed everything. "Daddy Marcus, can we get ice cream on the way home?" Marcus froze. Daddy Marcus. Not just Daddy. The addition of his first name marking him as distinct from the father Grace had never known, but still claimed through genetics and grief. Did you just call me Daddy Marcus? Ivy shrugged, casual about the monumental. Yeah, that's your name now. You're Daddy Marcus. Mom's daddy is Daddy Daniel, even though he's gone. Makes sense. The logic was airtight, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd thought it through. Marcus knelt to Grace's level, tears tracking down his face. You can call me that. You can call me anything you want. I'm honored either way. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck. I know. That Daddy Marcus is right, because you're my daddy now. And Ivy's. She pulled Ivy into the embrace, and Elena joined them, and Marcus held all three with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd almost lost everything by being too afraid to hold on. The reporter from the New York Times found them a week later. She was writing a feature on innovative grief counseling programs, had heard about the foundation from a source at Columbia's psychology department. Elena agreed to the interview on condition it focus on the work, not her personal story. The reporter honored that, mostly. But the article that ran 6 weeks later captured something Elena hadn't expected. Not just the foundation's methodology, but the transformation that had made it possible. The headline read, "From Boardroom to Breakthrough, How One CEO Learned That Love Matters More Than Profit." The piece went viral. Donations flooded in. Families from across the city reached out seeking help. Other organizations requested consultations about replicating the model. Within 3 months, they'd expanded from 12 children to 30. Within 6 months, they'd opened a second location in the Bronx. The work was exhausting, fulfilling, and nothing like running Titanium Ventures. Elena had never been happier. Marcus got a call in October from Brooklyn Music Academy. The principal, Mrs. Washington, was a widow herself. She'd lost her husband to a heart attack 3 years prior, understood grief in her marrow. "We'd like to offer you a full-time position, teaching guitar and sound engineering, $52,000 a year plus benefits." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. "I don't have a college degree." "You have Grammy-nominated credits and 7 years of single parenting. That's a better education than most of our faculty. Also, I saw what you built at the foundation. We'd be lucky to have you." He accepted on the spot, called Elena immediately. "I got a job. A real job. Teaching. That's wonderful." Her voice carried genuine joy, untainted by the knowledge that 52,000 was a rounding error in her former life. "I can contribute more now. To the household. To—" "Marcus." She cut him off gently. "This isn't about money. This is about you doing what you love. What you're brilliant at." "I'm proud of you." The words undid him. He'd spent 7 years being nobody's pride, being the guy who'd given up his dreams, the widower who mopped floors. Now he was a teacher, a foundation director, a husband and father to 3 girls who needed him. Rachel had been right. Brave love meant showing up even when scared, and he'd finally learned how. 1 year after the gala, they gathered at the foundation for an anniversary celebration. Not of the opening, that had been 6 months ago, but of the night everything changed. The night 2 broken families chose to become whole. The girls performed Where Love Lives for the families they now served. Parents who'd lost partners, children who'd lost parents, all of them learning to carry grief without being crushed by it. When the last note faded, Marcus pulled Elena close. Rachel used to say, "Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms, finds new vessels, new hearts brave enough to hold it." He gestured to the room full of healing families. She was right. Daniel was right. Our loves didn't die with them. They led us here, to this family, to this work, to each other. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, watching their daughters teach other children that survival was possible, that joy could exist alongside grief, that love, given freely and received bravely, was the only thing that mattered in the end. Outside, Brooklyn moved through October evening. Inside, family built from fragments prepared to head home, to the townhouse they'd made theirs, to the life they'd chosen over easier alternatives. Grace tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy Marcus? Did Mommy Rachel and Daddy Daniel know each other in heaven?" Marcus exchanged a look with Elena over the girls' heads, smiled. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think they're both smiling right now." Ivy nodded seriously. "Because we chose brave love." Exactly. They walked out into Brooklyn twilight, hand in hand. 4 people who'd been broken separately, learning to be whole together. The foundation sign glowed behind them. Hayes Castellano Foundation, where love lives. And for the first time in years, Marcus believed it. Love did live. In the space between grief and hope. In the courage to show up despite fear. In the choice to build family from whatever pieces remained after loss took what it wanted. They'd lost everything. They'd found more.